All right, I think we are live. So, hi everyone and welcome. We are very excited to be presenting to you all today, and thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to talk about something that our guest of the moment has experienced herself, which is obviously this transition to online and this rather chaotic transition, but how to create balance in that transition and how to make sure you still have effective learning outcomes. So the guest of the moment is Amber Chang. She is a lecturer at CSU Bakersfield. And yeah, we're very honored to have her and to have you all with us. So we'll get right into it.
So, hi, welcome. I'm Amber Chang. I'm a lecturer here at CSU Bakersfield, and I know we have some folks from around the country joining us. So, CSU Bakersfield is part of the California State University system. We're located about 100 miles north of Los Angeles in California's Central Valley. To give you a little bit of an idea about me, I have a background in public relations. I was a practitioner in the field for more than 20 years and then switched to lecturing in the communications department for the university. I have a bachelor's from CSU Bakersfield and a master of science in communication for online teaching from Minnesota State University, Mankato. And so I have been trained through my master's program to do online teaching and education in a really sort of easy manner and trying to figure out exactly how we make it work for students, especially right now, things are kind of tough.
Awesome. So, Lindsay, oh no, the feed went a little blank, but no worries. I think, Lindsay, can you still hear us okay?
Yes, I am still here. You'll all have to bear
Awesome.
with me. I've got a bit of a internet connection or video, but
No
I'll
worries.
go and introduce myself. I am the Packback strategy consultant. I work exclusively with CSU Bakersfield, Michigan State University, a number of other universities, and my role is to educate professors on Packback and then strategize in terms of how it could best be implemented into their classes. So I've been at Packback for almost 3 years. Prior to that, I was at another startup, so that's a bit of a fun journey for me and getting a good sense of how things are working.
Awesome. So yeah, Lindsay and I work closely together over at CSU Bakersfield with Amber, but I also work with a number of schools myself. And my role is to be an experience manager. So really just to make sure that implementation is really easy with Packback, and of course that you see the expectations that you set out to achieve achieved. So yeah, we've both worked really closely with a number of professors to make sure that discussion translates really seamlessly in their courses. And we've been working with Amber, and we're really excited to present with her and share the awesome things she's been able to see. And I also do want to encourage anyone who has any questions or anything to please throw them in the chat. We'll be answering questions periodically. So yeah, feel free to throw questions in there. Um, so without further ado, Amber, can you tell us a little bit about this transition and what has been happening in your world?
Yeah, so I've taught online most every semester since I've been with the university, at least one class, but then I have my face-to-faces, right? And it was March 12th. I remember the day very clearly. I was lecturing face-to-face in class, but all of a sudden phones were buzzing and students were, chattering, and the first words from the university had started to come down and let us know, hey, we're going to be moving to this online transition. And I was ready for it. I was okay because I've taught these classes online before. I kind of run my classes in a hybrid sort of situation. But then I started thinking, I'm going to have to revise this plan. And I went into what I call a triage mode. This is an emergency triage situation because we weren't ready for it. There's planning and there's preparation, but to some extent, you simply cannot be ready to experience what we've all gone through since mid-March in the US, maybe earlier for some of you. And so it was really important for me to try to not only get my classes underway and changed up, but also help students by helping other faculty as well. And so I actually offered some additional assistance to other faculty to help them get going. What is important to remember is there's a whole lot of best practices and things with online teaching and education, and right now it's not the time. Right now is the time to get things going for students so we have that educational continuity. I know for CSUB we already are going to be doing the fall semester online. Another California State University already said, or sorry, excuse me, CSUB is doing summer online. Hopefully I didn't make any of you panic. Another CSU said fall is already online. And so it's, it's coming. Who knows what's going to happen? I don't think anybody realizes what's going to happen with this quarantine situation. So it's about trying to figure out the way you can keep academics going forward for your students and help them ease through it, the best they can. So when we talk about this is kind of like the idea, yeah, that's a kindergarten classroom, right? And then they're all over the place. But for a lot of us, our college students are the exact same way. They're very distracted. They're kind of hyperactive. They don't know what's going on, right? And so it's about trying to figure out a good way to sort of, gather them together, get their thoughts working in a really cohesive manner, and move forward with that education the best we can. So if you haven't taught online before, you're going to know there are some really distinct issues we have to deal with online education. And a lot of it has to do with that sort of lack of traditional delivery where you're face to face, right? There's that personal responsibility the students have to come to class 2-3 times a week, see your face, say here when you call their name. And in online, then that responsibility changes. The onus is on the student to do the work, right? And so a lot of times they're not ready for it. They're not transitioning. And let me tell you, I have the majority of my load is a graduate writing requirement every student has to take. And they don't want to take it, right? And so they take it face to face because they struggle with writing or they don't really know how to learn how to write. And then all of a sudden you grab them all, you throw them on a learning management system and say, hey, you're going to do it online. And I've noticed this sense of panic and sort of a very temporary, I don't even know, like cessation to their dedication to the course that's now starting to come back now that we're hitting week 15 and starting to finish things off. It's very hard, right? It's very hard. For me, our department chair in communications encouraged us to run our courses hybrid in an effort to reduce the amount of paper. So quizzes and things like that, we're not giving out papers. So we were kind of ready for this to some extent, but it was about changing the students' learning habits, right? And then in order to do that, you have to change the professors' teaching habits and how they manage the curriculum and the overall presentation of the learning experience. It's good to have the technology. It's good to have these things available to us, but they're also a massive distraction, right? There's like right now stuff's popping up on my screen and my email is dinging and the chat's going and things are popping up here and there. The same thing happens to students. And so the ability to focus and concentrate on the education, it gets really, really hard. And then there's the second bullet here. All of a sudden, you were asked to change every way you give instruction, right? With no additional compensation. And that sounds kind of funny. We're in this to educate people. Clearly, we're not college professors because we're getting rich. But there wasn't anything there, right? And I have, for the last 4 semesters now, designed new courses. There's no extra compensation for these things, right? And right now, all of a sudden, you're having to give your instruction in a whole new way, plan discussions, plan tests, and do everything all differently without additional compensation. And that makes it even harder. It makes it much more challenging for us. So here's one of the issues. You want to build community, right? The students come into the classroom, you see the community in action, don't you? They're chatting and they're making plans and they're talking to each other and they're sitting with friends. And then online community, this is what you have. You've got Lindsay, you've got Ariam, and you've got me, and we are all over the place in 3 different states, I think, aren't we?
In two.
Maybe. No, 2. Okay, yeah, you guys are together. I'm on the other side of the country. And this happens in these online courses. The community building is not there. Yeah. Well, with my change in discussion style this semester for one of my courses that started the semester online, I saw the community start to build. And with the way I did this is I put student outcomes first. And if you know how to write student outcomes, you know they have to be demonstrated, right? And so how do you demonstrate learning and understanding in a discussion if students are just doing that sort of traditional professor asks a question, student gives a response, and then student talks about 2 other responses, right? How do you prove their learning? Well, you flip it on its ear. You flip it on its ear. You take it a whole different direction and you mix in a whole different type of discussion style. So this is what we all know to be the traditional discussions, right? This is it. This Twitter post right here is pure and simple how we know online discussion to go. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work. There's no academic benefit. There is no community building. It is just memorization and regurgitation, and that's all it is. And so how do you ensure those student learning outcomes are being met? How do you ensure students can demonstrate their learning for quality education? This doesn't do it. It doesn't do it. So this is what does it. And this is what's really interesting. So for this course, I started them in January using this system and a whole different style of discussions. And what we have here is active discussions from the students. So on the left is how the discussion starts. I post a purposefully vague prompt about the week's learning and then typically a current event. This is a PR course, and so I do not plan my discussions in advance because I'll pull a PR event happening, crisis or something, and relate it to the learning. Well, I'm asking them to do that instead. So obviously we've had one singular news event for about 6 weeks now, right? But the discussions have gotten a little bit boring. But students are learning, let's go back in the past and look at something. I've had some talk about the Route 91 shooting in Las Vegas several years ago. I've had some talk about a Pepsi commercial featuring Kendall Jenner from Super Bowls maybe 3 years ago. So they're learning to bring in these sort of issues with public relations as they do their discussions. This is what it does. Students must ask a question. They must pose the question in terms of the reading. They must have a citation in some sort of a way to support what they're talking about. And then in the very traditional discussion style, they must respond to two others. But if you look at the one on the right, which is a response to the question on the left, this is not the whole thing you normally see, which is, I agree, right? Isn't that typically, I agree, such thoughtful posts you made. Oh my gosh, you're so smart. That's what we often see, and we don't want to. Here, look at that post. It is thoughtful, it is researched, it is very important to understand the students are getting the learning through a whole different style of discussion. This one was only about jobs in PR, but they got the idea. So this is from one of my students, and I thought this was pretty cool. So I changed discussion on its ear. It is uncomfortable, y'all. Let me tell you that to start. It is uncomfortable because students are used to the other way, right? We as professors are used to the other way. Let me tell you, for me, it was very hard to go ask them a question because I didn't want to anymore. So I started learning myself. I'm going to give you a thing to talk about, but I'm not going to ask you a direct question anymore. And that was weird for all of us. Took some adjustment. And let me tell you, a few weeks it was actually kind of difficult because there was questions I wanted to ask them to drive the discussion, but I had to say, hey, back off. Back off, let them lead this. This is where it's going. Okay. I am so hands off. I only look at the discussions. I very rarely comment. In fact, I've commented once, and that's because I had to make a course correction with one student who repeated my sample question in his question. I think he was confused. It was very early on. Otherwise, they're guiding the discussion. They are taking care of it. They are making those choices to have really deep conversations with each other in this remote learning situation we find ourselves in. It keeps you from going insane monitoring massive discussions. Think about it right now. If you were to transition your classes to discussions right now, how many would you have to pay attention to? For me, I've got about 120 students. It's not much. I don't have large lectures. I've got writing classes, right? But that's a lot of discussion posts to manage. The students are taking care of it themselves. They are making it work. And that's what the beauty of all of this. So when we talk
Awesome.
about it, we want to make sure that it's intentional, and I want to let Ariam talk a little bit about it.
I jumped the gun here. I was so ready
That's
to
my
talk. So yeah, I think Amber did such an excellent job of really summing up like how she's created autonomy in her students and really gotten them excited to kind of have this community. And a really big part of that is this model of communities of inquiry. So that's really at the core of, creating a really meaningful discussion and a really robust discussion. And this idea basically it centers on giving students autonomy, which, like Amber said, is at the core of what she does, right? Being pretty hands off and saying, hey, this is going to be uncomfortable, but get comfortable with it because it's ultimately going to benefit the way that you learn. So, what that means is giving students a social presence, a teaching presence, and a cognitive presence. And this doesn't mean you're that presence, right? It means that they're becoming that presence for themselves because they have to develop their own questions, because they have to develop a means of thinking about the way that they're thinking, right? Which a lot of the times, and like having been, very recently in college myself, it's not something that you even think you'll be doing when you're in college. You're kind of just like, I'm here to absorb information. But there's so much power in being given a platform to not only absorb information, but to be the one who's disseminating that information. And that's really what's at the core of this communities of inquiry model. Um, and so, right, so like, why this community of inquiry model, right? Why is this the effective way? And, how can I be sure that this is really going to work? But I think, Amber said it really beautifully, is that she's not feeling like she has to monitor everything super closely, or that she has to be that, presence that's course correcting every single student, right? Like she said, if she sees something that she needs to correct, she will. But, she's even holding back to the point where it's painful because she wants to get in there and say, hey, like, I want to ask this question. But ultimately, it's the power that students have in knowing that, they're being trusted to create information and they're being trusted to do a good job. So that's really at the heart of this model, is that creating that really meaningful peer-to-peer engagement comes from giving students a way to be the ones, taking charge of the discussion, which uncomfortable, yes, but can become second nature the way that it has for Amber's students, for sure. And Amber, did you want to touch a little bit on like what your thoughts are on this model and how autonomy has really helped your students or what it's done for them?
For me, this is much like a flipped classroom model where you actually have the students drive the discussion, even in face-to-face courses. Small group communication is one where I think this happens quite a bit. And it's really important because as opposed to them working to please the instructor, they're working to learn, right? They're working to make sure they're posing smart questions. And there's a few things that we can do in this discussion tool to really encourage them, almost with like a game theory type concept, to increase the quality of their discussions, to increase the quality of their responses. And I think it's working. My students are specific. Obviously, these are PR students. We like to talk. We like to write, right? And so there's that natural discussion element to it, as opposed to students who may be in a course or in a field where that sort of, gregariousness isn't as well known. But it works just fine as far as I've seen, and I can't wait to try to flip things on the students again. Once they get used to it, I think they thrive in it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like I said, it's that thing where like you try it once, you're uncomfortable, and then you try it again and you're like, hey, this is something I can do. Um, so with that, yeah, again, right, it comes with setting a structure, but a fairly loose structure. So like Amber said, she encourages them to ask a question and respond to two of their peers, and encourages them, right, to try out different things, right? So if they don't respond to each other necessarily, they can still give really positive reinforcement by using the various features to say, hey, I liked this, just to encourage one another, right? So creating that peer to peer engagement and also making them think, you know, how am I going to respond to this? How can this inform what I'm asking? Not just 2 + 2 = 4. That's so insightful. So, Amber, can you talk a little bit about that ask one, answer two structure? And we'll go ahead and actually show a little bit of what Amber's community looks like. And Amber, I'll let you talk about, what this ask one, answer two and how this structure looks.
Right. So ask one, answer two is typical for a lot of discussions, but in this case, the ask one part is very specific. You must ask an open-ended question, which means there is no yes, no answers possible here. You must ask a question that is not only thoughtful and researched, but requires thought and research on the parts of the students who are replying. This is where it gets a little bit different, and I found I couldn't quite emulate that in the learning management system we use at the university. And so this tool came in a lot, really helpful. What you see here is very recent questions. In fact, I think the top one here is 414. So this is just as we were transitioning out. This course already was running in weekly modules because that's how I structure my online courses. So each week we study a chapter or two, depending on the week, and then we have our discussion. So the students have to ask a single one. And for example, here you see the question regarding the Mandalay Bay shooting and the sort of reverse lawsuit Mandalay Bay fired against victims. And I don't speak legalese, so I'm sure there's some logic to it. It seems callous and cold to me, but there's probably legal backing for it. So they started the discussion, and this one already had 5 responses shortly after it was posted because this is very close to home for us. People from Bakersfield died in that shooting. A number of others were present. And so the students really, it's when that tragedy hits close to home, and it drove a lot of good discussion. Now, the respond to 2 is just as specific. No basic responses allowed here. And so if you take a look, you'll see 2 response examples that took place. The second one on the right, there's actually a source associated with it, which is a national news source talking about the lawsuit. And you also have 2 sort of different perspectives on the question asked by the original student. And I encourage them to have peaceful discussion and just really fair disagreement, because public relations is a field where there's a lot of theory and ethics involved, but there's also a dark side, right? People know about like publicists and promoters and things of that nature, which don't exactly have the ethical basis the other side does. And so often it's important for me to make sure students just engage in a really like broad discussion of specifics in each of these fields in each of the week that we attack. So this is what it looks like in the community. I've been really excited about how the students have been asking questions, and they're actually asking each other questions I would have never thought of. Never. There are 30 of them. There is one of me. And you know what? I'm hoping I'm making them smarter than I am, because their questions are awesome and the way they're responding to each other is awesome. And we are building a community through this engagement of students who are not near each other. They're not. I think about it, the week we actually transitioned, one of my students in this class plays basketball for the university, and they were at the WAC tournament in Vegas just before the quarantine was lifted and they were shipped home. And he was doing his work from a hotel in Vegas, waiting for the basketball tournament and talking about what he was seeing there as they were, prepping. Las Vegas was prepping to shut the city down. And it was very fascinating. And that is how this works well, because they're not sitting in a classroom next to each other, but they are still having an active community learning together, and it works beautifully.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love how you talk
Amber,
about that. Oh, Lindsay, go
go
ahead.
ahead, Arima. Yeah, Amber, I was just going to say we had a question come up of what type of guidelines do you put in the syllabus, or what do you give your students to help structure the type of discussion that you're seeing here?
So you're probably not going to like my answer, but I don't structure it. They are told they must ask an open-ended question and they must provide 2 detailed and researched responses, but otherwise it's up to them. This is uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable because you as the instructor, you want to guide that learning and you want to drive them to understand exactly what it is that they're experiencing for the week. They do it on their own. They do it. And I'm a communication person, guys. I have a 13-page syllabus, right? Seriously, because I put everything in it. It is my contract with them. My discussion, it's a tiny little section. That's the rule right there, tiny little section. And it works beautifully. It works beautifully. I see students' questions about first year. I don't have first years. I might this next semester when I'm going to try this again. That should be interesting. But most of the time I have upper division students. But again, students have been doing discussions through high school. They understand how they work. This is different. And so I don't know that it would matter if they're first years or fourth years. You're still going to make them uncomfortable. And that's kind of fun. But it also shows you exactly how well the learning can go.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that actually fits kind of seamlessly that question into the next portion, which addresses sort of these best practices for achieving really effective online discussion. And we say best practices to say, like, these are really loose. I think at the beginning, Amber, you even said, like, right now is not the time to get really, in the weeds with like pedagogy and specifics, but it is the time to have really easy, really achievable steps so that you can do what you need to do, right? Because right now is a time to address need. And so I think you actually summed up this first part really beautifully, which is setting really simple expectations that, ask one question, answer two, because you are not really the like guiding presence in the community, but they know that you are there, obviously, because it's required. And so setting those really simple deadlines kind of build those habits for them of they're coming back each week, right? This isn't just something that they do, once a week and then forget it, until 2 weeks later. They're doing this every week and building those skills. And Amber, actually, can you talk a little bit about, how you've kind of seen that skill building? I know you said it's been, it was uncomfortable for them at the beginning, watching them squirm and everything, but then, how did they adjust to that?
So I think I mentioned it already, the idea of game behind this. And there's a lot of talk about game theory in education as far as how to really get students to achieve because they're used to working toward those points and those rankings and those scales in the video games already, right? And so the way that I structure the learning was they started to see these things called curiosity points, and I'm seeing them work harder to frame better questions where there's an algorithm behind it determining the quality of the question. I'm not determining the quality of the question, the system is, and I think the students are learning to do better and try harder in an effort to increase those points. And those points have no bearing on their grade. It's not even that it's, the higher the points, the higher the grade. It's not that case the way I'm running it. I think they're just trying for it. And so as opposed to just getting participation points, which I am never in favor of, students are scoring based on how well they're learning and they're doing it all on their own. Right? This is not some just basic perfunctory discussion. This is really, it is hard work, and they have to apply the learning and the reading each week with not only their question, but their answer. And they're doing it. They're doing it, and they're doing it all on their own. It's a very simple guideline. They're doing it.
Yeah, that actually very seamlessly fits in right with this idea of fostering autonomy. So, we talked about it a little earlier with the communities of inquiry model, but you have to make sure that students have a social presence. They have to be there for their learning. And I think, everything, Amber, that you said about creating community and about having a student in Las Vegas waiting for a basketball tournament, still able to, reach their peers and still able to engage. That's this idea of a social presence, right? This idea of being able to engage with your fellow students even if you can't literally be sitting next to them. And so that's exactly where fostering autonomy comes in. When you are able to initiate conversation with your peers, when you're able to feel really confident about that, that's really where that comfortability comes in, that autonomy really comes in. um, and also, right, this idea of a cognitive presence. So, um, being able to have your students not only post their thoughts, but to be really, really, really thoughtful in the way that they're doing so, right? So, Amber, can you talk a little bit about what a cognitive presence looks like for you, and maybe what you experienced before this discussion?
Yeah, so one of the things about autonomy that's very difficult is for the professor to be hands off, right? And the more hands off you are, the more the students wonder exactly how much the professor's actually doing. And so it's an unusual trade-off, especially for those end of the semester surveys that you have to deal with. And so you might want to be prepared for that a little bit because students maybe now in this current situation they have an idea of how much it actually takes to get an online class together, but before I don't think they did. They didn't really get it. And so they might say, oh, the learning was entirely up to me. I never talked to the professor, blah, 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 even though I make myself incredibly available through a number of systems and modalities. It's hard. And so what I want the students to do is to realize that this is on purpose. I'm helping them to build that autonomy with their own process, their own abilities, right? They need to make it work themselves. And so what it does is it really starts to engage with a student to student connection, and they make it work. Okay. And the more that they ask these questions, the deeper they think the questions through in the first place, as opposed to asking some sort of superficial question, the harder they're working, and they're doing it. In my class, they are trying harder to be more successful. And I just think it's them. They just want to score better. I mean, it's not even the grade. They just want to score better, and they want to look like, hey, look at my curiosity points. They're way up there. And they work really, really hard to craft their questions. I wish I could see the evolution of one question, like this is what I was going to ask, and then this is what I ended up asking come the time it was time to post, and see how it changed along the way. It's all in their brain, right? And it's all in their planning. But I think that they're trying and working harder, and the questions are proof of it. They're proof of it. And I'm hoping that they're sort of transitioning this really active learning into their other courses as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that last piece is giving students a teaching presence. So even, having them learning how to successfully engage with your peers, a big part of that is being confident and being really comfortable in the material, right? So being able to play sort of that teaching role. Like Amber said, sometimes she finds herself sitting back and painfully so. But that's to better the students and to make sure that, when they are discussing with each other, they're going beyond really basic answers, really basic questions. They're pulling from the deepest depths of what they're genuinely curious about in their learning, in order to hopefully, shed light on information. As Amber said, she finds herself learning from her students sometimes, right? And maybe they're, really helping each other to develop different perspectives. And that's the ultimate hope, I think. Um, and yeah, the I think a really big piece of this is knowing that you're playing chess and you're not playing checkers, right? So sometimes knowing that, it's going to be imperfect, nothing is perfect, but overall, what is this going to give your students that you maybe couldn't have given them in a different way? Amber, can you talk a little bit about, what does staying focused on what really matters? What does that mean to you?
Well, a lot of that I think has to do with making sure the learning is taking priority. I was looking at my notes when we first started talking about this, and one of the things I said in relation to this slide is let it go. Professors need to let it go, right? You don't need to always guide the discussion. I'm seeing firsthand that all I needed was one course correction out of now 15 weeks of discussion with 30 students. They're just doing it on their own. Let them drive the discussion, because I think I'm seeing them correct each other even along the way. And so when someone asks one question, particularly when we were talking about ethics and the history of this field, which can be very entertaining, they were correcting each other. And it was really cool. And let me give you an example about how students make this work. So a few weeks ago, the subject matter suggestion had to do with pop culture examples. I was kind of in quarantine fatigue, and I was tired of talking about COVID, and they were wanting to talk about it. So I wanted them to tell me about PR and pop culture. What better way to get a student's attention than to say, hey, talk about something you like? So I gave my example. My favorite example of PR is in the movie The American President, and President Andrew Shepard's speech toward the end, which emulates Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if we're going to start talking about, academia and stuff. And I said to them, tell me about an example of PR in pop culture and talk it through. And so someone talked about Joaquin Phoenix at the Oscars and shared the speech. Someone else talked about a marketing scene from a show called Schitt's Creek. Hope I'm saying that right. I've never seen the show, but I saw the scene. It was great. Someone else talked about social media and Game of Thrones. I leave it up to them. If they want to talk about it, they want to pose the question, they can go for it. And that's, for me, something that I think a lot of professors might struggle with, is giving the students the autonomy. You want to drive the discussion. You want to make sure the learning is on point. But I think you need to put it in the hands of the students. They need to take the lead, and it works really well. I hope that answered your question, Erin.
It did. No, it was beautiful. And I think, right, with that, none of this is achievable unless you choose the right tool for the job, right? So, obviously, we are partial, but it's all about making sure that the tool you're using is able to support the kind of community you want to build, right? So, if your focus is giving students autonomy, letting go a little bit of that control and saying, hey, overall, my goal is to achieve I'm trying to go past just rote memorization. I'm trying to develop I'm trying to develop metacognition. I'm trying to get really active engagement out of my students. you need to pick a tool then that supports that doesn't need, so much input from you, but rather encourages your students to really take control. And also a tool that scales really well. So I think, Amber right now has 30 students, but there are communities on Packback of 1,000 students, right? And it's all about knowing, that you don't have to be that guiding presence in the community. You can be with a smaller class, right? But even as Amber said, with 30 students, she finds herself only course correcting when she really needs to and really looking at the overall picture. And then there are gems that come out of that, right? Everyone works to sort of, when they see a standard set by another student, they're also working to achieve that. And a lot of that comes with, knowing if you have a really large class, maybe sit back a little bit more, allow feedback when it's needed, right? And so on from there. So I think, Lindsay, I will throw it over to you if you want to talk a little bit about what implementation looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So to get a better sense of how to set things up, but also keep it really simple, what a lot of professors are doing is simply adding it to their syllabus and replacing it with their current participation grade, or pulling points from something else to then find that 10 to 15% toward participation. So amending the syllabus is the first step there. A short announcement in terms of those expectations that Amber touched on are easy, simple, but making sure that they're very clear to the students as well. After that, the final step is just assigning that first discussion post and ensuring that the students are keeping it open-ended and really being able to explore what they're curious about while posting questions that are thought-provoking and tying in current events, material from the readings, whatever it may be that's specific to your course. So those are really the three easy action items. And that's what Ari and I are here to do, is ensure that you're able to get a better sense of what Packback is and how it can best fit into your class. So in terms of next steps for Packback, if that's something that you're interested in, feel free to reach out to myself or the link added to schedule a virtual walkthrough to see a community that's more fitted towards your course objectives and your course content. And then Amber has also included her email so that if you have questions more relating to how she's been using it or what she's seen in her class, she is more than willing to answer those.
Awesome. Yeah, we are, so pleased that so many of you were able to join us. I think, Amber, listening to you present on this is so exciting for me because I just am hearing, I think it's so gratifying to know that, right? We set a plan in place at the beginning of the term and then we just hit the ground running and your students really took to it. And so, like you said, getting those habits in place and just learning how to be a little uncomfortable, which right now everyone's a little uncomfortable. And so just learning how to live in this feeling, I think is something that even I'm taking that lesson from you, Amber, because I think you do such a flawless job of just really getting comfortable when needed, right? And so I guess we'll open the floor up to any questions. But Amber, did you have any, last remarks?
Well, I was responded to Penny in the chat here. She asked about multiple deadlines. No, I have a one modular deadline each week at 11:59 p.m. on the Sunday. And you run the risk of maybe getting that flurry of activity right toward the end, but I really haven't seen that since about week one because students realize they need each other to get the grades. Yeah, because if you don't have but a few people posting, then you're going to have the majority of students responding to those posts, and it's just not going to drive the discussion. And so I think just through my messages and announcements to them, I encourage them early in the week, post Tuesday, Thursday, somewhere in there, and then give people the time to respond. And what I'm finding, which is interesting, is a lot of times with the old-fashioned discussion style, students post their response, students respond, and the conversation dies. It's just dead. But with this style, where the students post their questions and other students respond, there's discussion driven through the system, and it's working really, really well. And so students are carrying the conversation throughout the week, and I really like seeing that.
Yeah, I think Stacy actually asked a question that fits really well. She said, how is Packback different from a traditional discussion board in an LMS like Canvas?
So for me, Stacy, it runs separately. We use Blackboard right now, though the academic senate voted to switch to Canvas come fall, so I may have to call you because I need to learn Canvas. It just runs separately. I open it in a web browser, and it's almost a social media threading in style, kind of. Most recent posts appear at the top. You scroll down to see more, and it's really easy to see as opposed to Blackboard. I don't know about Canvas, I can't comment on it, but Blackboard, all you see is some title, and unless the student gave a very thoughtful title, nobody knows whether or not to click on it. And then you have to click on it and switch screens and back and forth. And it's just kind of a whole lot of extra work. With the style here, it works in its own web browser. The posts are threaded. Students get to see what they need, and it makes it very easy to engage in the discussion.
Awesome.
And Stacey,
Yeah.
a little really what separates us from a regular LMS discussion board is the fact that we're backed by AI and algorithms that are set up to maintain the quality of a post. So coaching students as they're typing out the questions and responses, but also similar to that tweet that we saw earlier in this presentation was a student posting, "Oh, I totally agree, or great question." That would be something that our system would flag and then send the student a coaching email on in order to help them improve throughout.
Actually,
That's a little, would be happy to touch base with you and share more.
yeah. And Amber, can you touch on, how the content is different from what you've seen in those traditional discussion boards?
As far as the students
Mm.
themselves?
Yeah, as far as like the posts, the questions.
Yeah, so I touched on that earlier because in the traditional discussion styles where we would run it like through Blackboard, I would ask a question and students respond. And then the discussion just dies out, and it doesn't really drive the community. It doesn't really drive the students to lead the learning themselves. And so it's a lot different, and it works in a much better way. And I think students, because of the presentation of those posts and those questions, students can look through. Students have to ask the question right up top, kind of like the title, and it makes it very easy for other students to say, hey, I want to talk about this one, and then go read it and respond. And I think it's really helping them to learn more about the field and we're studying as they're driving the discussion themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we had a question from Penny about curiosity points. So, Amber, can you talk a little bit about what those have meant to you?
Yeah, so curiosity points is part of the AI Packback uses, and what it does is it rates the quality of the post on several factors. I'm sure Lindsay can talk about it much smarter than I can, but from my point of view, I believe there's a max of like 100 curiosity points, and I am seeing some where the students are achieving 90, and so it's basically scoring the post through their AI on the quality of the question they ask, the content of the post with the supporting information, the source that they're using, and sort of driving them to increase the thoughtfulness and quality of their question as they go along. And it's kind of interesting to see, and that's, to me, that's kind of that idea of game behind it, because they want to get that better score and improve their rankings and get up higher on the leaderboard. And it's driving what like game culture has pushed into our world, into education, and I really like it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very interesting because hearing you talk, I used Packback when I was a sophomore in college, which is not too long ago. But a huge part of it for me was those curiosity points because just being able to like sort of play a game every time I got on was just a really large driving factor in me even wanting to come back and just do the work was like, I wonder what my score is going to be this week. And as Amber said, it's more a measure of like quality and kind of effort, but by no means is it a grade, right? So it's there as sort of like a standard, it's there as a motivator, but it's really, it doesn't translate to a grade. So again, it's sort of that game for students, right? Of like, what can I do? How can I be better this time?
So I see Linda's question. Do you mind if I grab it?
Oh, yes, please.
So Linda, hi. So no. It's really interesting. So this is where I kind of go back to old-fashioned. I grade on participation in the discussion, but students understand to get participation, as in they must do the work. They must ask an open-ended question with research and backing and supporting information. So no, you grade based on them doing the work, but it's the quality of the work they're actually driving their own scores in, and it doesn't really affect the grade.
Yeah, and to touch on that, Packback, like the way Packback is graded is within the platform itself, and then the way that you translate that grade to your actual grade book, that's completely up to you. So the two are separate, and like Amber said, one is really to check for like participation.
Right. And then Alan, no, I do not have a discussion rubric. I've got them for everything else, but based on what I just said, the content of the post isn't as important to me. I mean, the quality of the post and the content is important as opposed to just doing the work. And so because I'm letting them drive it, I want them to make mistakes and I want them to ask questions, even if they're silly, because if it's a question they've got, someone else might have it and they're the one willing to step up. And so I don't have a rubric for the discussions, but I kind of just basically tell the students the framework and the rules, and then let the system drive the discussion from there.
Yeah. And with that, Alan, that's really Lindsay and I's role is to, if that's something you're interested in providing to your students, sort of that rubric, we are more than happy to work with you. Or if you're at a different university, their team is more than happy to work with you to provide like a rubric and some sort of guideline. Awesome. Well, is Packback a free service? Of course, Ellen. So Packback is not a free service. However, to each student, it is $25. Um, so yeah, that's the cost of Packback. Amber, do you want to touch on, your experience with having your students sort of take on the additional cost and what you
Yeah.
experienced there?
Yeah, and that was something I thought long and hard about. I was called by someone, like cold called by someone sitting in my joint lecturer office one day last fall about using this for spring. And I knew I was going to have an online course and I knew I was going to have a discussion component. And then I heard it was $25 and I went, oh, well, I mean, obviously Packback, they have systems to support and programmers and everybody. So it makes sense. But then I was like, oh, crap. And then I learned my text that I normally use was going to transition to online only and drop like a third of the price, probably more actually. And so I thought, okay, well, might as well try this now because it's going to be less expensive than it had been the previous semester for students. And I didn't hear anything from students about it. Not one thing. And I was kind of expecting to. $25 is like kind of right there on the edge of affordable to not affordable in my impression for students. But I didn't hear a thing. And I'm really impressed by that. But then it probably helped the textbook was considerably more affordable than usual.
Yeah, and with that as well, we definitely are sensitive to any sort of, cost-based like student need issues that may arise. And so we have a student team that works with students who, may need assistance. So absolutely mechanisms in place for that. I think, yeah, are there any more questions? Please keep the questions coming. I'm like, these are great. But of course, yeah, if you don't have any immediate questions to throw in the chat, I will go ahead and add a link to the chat right now. Oh, I think Lindsay already did so. So yeah, please join us there. Thank you, Stacey, for joining us. But yeah, if you have any questions, we are so excited to hopefully talk to many of you. And yeah, thank you for joining us. Amber, thank you for hosting with us. You are the coolest. So
You're funny, but my pleasure. Thank you.
awesome, of course. And yeah, Lindsay, was there anything you wanted to close out with?
Thank you all for attending today, and for those of you that couldn't, we'll be sharing out the slides from this presentation afterwards, so feel free to share them with your colleagues and pass them along. I know Amber and I are available for any additional questions you have, whether it's about Packback or more pertaining to how does this fit into a course and best practices, but thank you all for attending.
Awesome. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.